I couldn't video reply to this person's comment, but I'll show you the comment right now. Why do I need to rely on other people to teach history? In this video, I was asking people for suggestions where they think there are coverage gaps in the news and in information, because if we can't rely on mainstream sources anymore, and there are some great creators that are covering some areas, I was asking, hey, what do you think I should be talking about on my channels? Are there any gaps in politics or history or anything where you think no one's covering and someone needs to talk about that's not talking about it? And I was asking for suggestions. In particular, I was commenting on something that historian Tad Stormer was talking about, this new executive order. And there's been a lot of them. I know it's hard to keep up, but the one I'm talking about is this one. It's called Restoring America's Fighting Force. And this is an executive order that covers matters having to do with the military. And here's the important bit, Section 6. Protecting American values. The DoD and armed forces, including any educational institution operated or controlled thereby, are prohibited from promoting, advancing, and otherwise inculcating the following un-American ideas. And among them is that America's founding documents are racist or sexist. So we can't discuss how our founding fathers were slave owners. I'm going to show you a little clip from Tad's video in a bit, but here's why this matters. This executive order doesn't just cover the military. It covers all military contractors, vendors, anyone the military hires for services, anything. It also includes universities that are run by the military. And I'm not sure whether you're aware, but there are 5 military academies in the United States. The U.S. Military Academy in West Point, the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado, the Merchant Marine Academy in Kingsport, New York, and finally, the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, which is in Connecticut, just down I-95. These are the institutions that educate our military officers, and they are going to be learning a whitewashed version of history. This will also have a ripple effect because you know what else the federal government runs? The Smithsonian Institution. Ever been to DC? Ever been to the Smithsonian? The Smithsonian is run by a board of regents, which includes the vice president, 3 senators, 3 representatives, 9 citizens, and the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. This board of regents appoints the secretary, who serves kind of as the CEO of the Smithsonian Institute. And this board controls all of the buildings, funding, exhibits, rules, etc. of the Smithsonian Museum. So our biggest, network of federal museums is run by people who don't want to teach history, who want to leave out massive swaths of history and go with this whole patriot narrative thing. Tad will explain to you what the patriot narrative is.
This is the core of the patriotic education that has been prompted in and promoted in Project 2025 and by the 1776 Commission. This is the ideological groundwork that is coming for every educational institution in the United States, small, large, R1 to your local library and your local museum, and it will be supported by the heritage sites and other institutions that will be more than happy to collaborate with it, especially as they line up for funding for the 250th anniversary of the celebration of American independence that is now going to be completely reconfigured, taken away from those people who are going to tell a more inclusive story and put in the hands of those who are going to celebrate American exceptionalism. They're going to line up for it. It's interesting that during World War II, the federal government did something similar. It created the patriot myth to cohere a divided American society to come together to fight fascism, to fight authoritarianism. Now the same tool and a similar message is being used to promote those very things.
So how long do you think it will be before all the museums who receive any kind of federal grants or funding are going to have to comply with these rules? Ever take any school trips to museums as a kid? Most people have at some point as part of your, curriculum when you're talking about a specific time in history or a specific thing, there'll be a little field trip and you'll go to a museum or something. What if that information that the students are looking at is not accurate? Those museums may end up having that whitewashed version of history that they're expecting at West Point and the Naval Academy. And that doesn't even cover things like textbooks. There are several publishing companies in the United States that are funded by right-wing Christian zealots, and they produce a lot of textbooks specifically for states like Texas, which is the second biggest buyer of textbooks in the country, second only, of course, to California. And even though their customers are primarily private schools and, people want to homeschool, the governments of a lot of these red states are incorporating information from these educational companies in their public school curriculums as well, and have been for a very long time. Because the reason why a lot of kids in the South grew up with this warped idea of history, like the idea that slavery was Black immigration and not stealing people from a continent and forcing them to work for no wages, is because of an organization called the Daughters of the Confederacy. The United Daughters of the Confederacy, or the UDC, campaigned heavily in the 1920s to have textbooks in Southern schools that taught their version of history, that taught about the lost cause and the glorious sacrifice of the Confederacy during the Civil War. They campaigned and influenced state legislatures to only have textbooks in schools that they approved. Now, the whole lost cause, Civil War history thing is basically saying that slavery didn't really play that big of a part in the Civil War. And this whole theory minimizing slavery ended up in textbooks all over the South, in public schools. 70 million people attended public schools in the South between 1890 and 1970. So there are millions of people living today, voting today, that were taught history from those textbooks that were approved by the UDC and had been used in those schools in various red states for generations. So if you're wondering why there's a bunch of YT people who have a really messed up version of US history, that's why. The UDC's influence on textbooks in Southern schools had staying power, and these myths still persist today. Here's what the UDC's North Carolina chapter had to say about this in 1909 at their convention. Their division president, Mrs. I.W. Faison, said, "We must see that the correct history is taught our children and train them, not in hatred towards the North who differed from us, but in knowledge of the true history of the South, in the war between the states and the causes that led up to the war, so that they will be able to state facts that prove that they are right in the principles for which their fathers fought and unalived, and continue to preserve and defend their cause, until the whole civilized world will come to know that our cause was just and right." There is an expression often used by our people as the lost cause. Let us forget such, for it is not the truth. No, our cause was not lost because it was not wrong. So in case you're wondering why so many people you encounter on these social media apps, on Facebook, out in the world, are so ignorant to just the fundamental facts of history, that's why. They learned from textbooks written by people like that. People who thought the South was in the right. That's exactly what's happening now, except now it's coming via an executive order from the President of the United States. Why do we rely on others to teach us history? Because we read history in books. If the only books that are available are the books that are talking about this lost cause BS, where are you going to find the truth?